good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. Thank you for everyone that took the time out of the day to join us. This is TIAC's first webinar being hosted, and we welcome Jim. So TIAC's kicked this off, and Jim's going to set the bar. So I guess this is a tall task for Jim. We had a brief introduction and chat yesterday, so we got to know Jim a little bit. So I'm excited to be your moderator for today. The platform that we're using, I'm not sure if everybody's used to yet, but it's fairly user-friendly. There's opportunities to ask questions, raise hands, and have a little chat bar on the side. So as Jim's going through his presentation, interact with us through that platform. And just as a test in the chat box, if everybody is open to, just type in where you're calling in from, so we know where everybody's home base is today in this wacky world that we're living in. It's nice to know who we're connecting with and where they're situated right now. So with that being said, this is going to be recorded and available if you need this sent to you afterwards, or it may even be up on the TIAC website. I'm not sure. We'll get to that point when we get finished. But interact, be yourself, chat away, ask questions, and welcome to TIAC's first webinar. So welcome, Jim. So brief introduction of Jim here. He said he was born at a very young age, and I tended to agree with this next point that he brought up. He said great people come from Saskatchewan. So I agreed with him on that front. And Jim's a family man. He's been married 40 years. He had to check on that number quite a bit, so we won't hold that against him. And he loves spending time with his grandkids and his kids, and he chases a golf ball around once in a while on a golf course, and he said he's a scratch golfer on some of the toughest courses in North America. So kudos to him. He's been involved in finance throughout the years in different facets in the private and the public sectors, and he's bringing that knowledge to us today. One of the neat things that got pointed out yesterday is he volunteered and spent lots of time working with students through their business plans and models and how they can fund themselves or seek other fundings and whatnot. So I'm sure he'll get into more details, but that does show what kind of character Jim brings to us. So welcome, Jim, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you, your colleagues across Canada as you're doing the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. And it was fun to connect with yourself and with Robin and James Lowe yesterday, just as we did a little bit of a test. And I was rather pleasantly surprised that so many of us in our group yesterday were from that province of Saskatchewan with the with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders we talked about. So good things can come out of small places, which is good to know. Thanks for the work that you're doing, Sean. So you're going to be helping over the course of this session, and I appreciate that. Thank you in advance. And these are challenging times. There's no doubt about that. Chasing a golf ball, they've changed the way that happens now, where you don't actually go in and pull the ball out of the cup. So innovation, someone came up with that idea. Someone's brilliant idea, I suppose, and all of us are having to adapt in one way, shape, or form as we face this new reality that we face. We're not out of the woods yet. That's not a reference to my golf ball hunting adventures that we talked about yesterday. I am hoping to do more of that in the days and weeks ahead, but not right now. It's raining where I am. So thank you to the Thermal Insulation Association of Canada, for all of your members, for this opportunity to talk with you on an important subject. I'm going to change gears here, and hopefully we'll get into the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll be able to share some information through that mode as well. And tapping into your inner entrepreneur, how do you do that? Well, that's the question that is posed here. And you've maybe got some ideas prior to coming into today's webinar. You've maybe thought about that. We want to tap into that, and you'll have opportunity to share some of your insights as to what that means and how it all fits together over the course of the presentation. So thank you very much for your input in advance. Now, there was a saying that you have probably heard before, and I'm just going to mention it right now. It says, "May you live in interesting times. And these COVID-19 times are certainly more than a little bit interesting, that's for sure. With our topic today, I'm thinking that the key to understanding what we're dealing with here today really rests with being able to get an understanding of what entrepreneurial thinking is all about. Now, you may not own your own business at this point in time. Maybe you do, but more than likely you probably don't. You work for someone, and that's good. That's all part of the experience. We are going to imagine that you are an entrepreneur, and I would encourage you that as you work in your day-to-day environment, that you think about creative ways that you can come up with solutions to problems and challenges that are being faced on a regular basis. So let's dive right into that and see if we can maybe see if we can maybe explore this in a little bit more detail. As Sean mentioned, I've enjoyed working in both the public sector, the private sector, and the not-for-profit sector over my career. And your career path, I'm not sure exactly where it's taken you or where it will take you yet in the future, but I really do believe that if we can embrace this concept of always being inquisitive, exploring the opportunities that are in front of us, we may see problems, but think of those as being challenges that need a creative solution. So I would encourage you to take that forward with you today as we go through this session, but also in your everyday work life. As we venture down this road, this path, we're looking for creative ways to think about things. And also at the same time, not just for yourself, but also for the people that you work with, your colleagues, those that report to you. Can we find some ways to tap into their potential, their creativity, and harness that for the good of the organizations that we are working in? Or again, if you have your own business, for your own development and growth of your business as it goes forward. I believe that it's through collaboration and through working together that we can generate, develop, and implement better solutions that lead to a better future. So I think it's up to each of us as leaders in our own right. It's up to each of us and the organizations that we're in to find ways to communicate, maybe a compelling why. Why is it that the things that we're doing are important? And then beyond that, it's up to us to find ways to empower those that are around us, to allow them to come up with innovative solutions. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to cover some things just to hit the highlights right now. We're going to explore some ideas. We're going to give you some definitions, some formal definitions for those that are really excited about that type of thing. So don't be disappointed, it's coming up. We're going to look at some roadblocks to entrepreneurial thinking, what gets in the way of coming up with some of those creative solutions. And then I've got a four-stage framework that I want to give to you, and that's a key piece of what we want to touch on today. It will help you to champion those innovative ideas and take them through to a successful outcome. That's what you really want to see. We're going to explore some helpful tools, and you've probably got a number of them that you've experienced over the past. I would encourage you to share those with your members as you found them to be helpful. And we're also going to take a look at what are some of the characteristics that help to cultivate an entrepreneurial environment, a culture. Okay, so let's get right into it. The question that I have for you is this: how does an entrepreneur think? And Sean, this is one of those places where, again, the members are maybe going to be encouraged. Well, I encourage the members to use the chat feature. How do entrepreneurs think? Maybe just in a word or two. Add a couple of comments into the chat feature, and Sean will come to you in a moment, okay, as those come forward. But as you do that, an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is more likely to see those problems as being challenges and then look for potential opportunities that they can move forward with. It's about taking a look at those challenges through fresh eyes. And I think that's where the power of tapping into others, our colleagues, our coworkers, our peers, experts that we can engage from other perspectives, that's where it gives us an opportunity to come up with a better and perhaps a more cost-effective solution. So Sean, Is there anything that you're seeing there in terms of comments from our participants?
Yeah, we've got some comments here on risk takers, challenging the status quo, continuous improvement, risk versus reward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's tap into your inner entrepreneur, okay? Let's take a look at what it takes to champion an innovative idea and bring it through to success. Now, I apologize. I was really hoping that we could have had a couple of extra participants in our discussion here today, but as I was, I think they had other things on their agenda, on their plate, and they weren't able to make it for various reasons, COVID-19 maybe being one of them, okay? These two individuals, we may think of them as being very successful, and the truth is they are. But they are, and I don't know them very well. I don't know them at all, only what we see in the public eye. My first impression of Warren Buffett, who's seen on the left there, is that perhaps he's maybe more of a B type of personality. He's not the extrovert that you would have with a Richard Branson on the right there. Branson, you've probably recalled seeing him in balloon rides. He's got this SpaceX thing going, you know, take a trip into the upper atmosphere, out into outer space, if you will, with space tourism. So a lot of exciting things happening there. But Warren Buffett, on the other hand, there's no doubt he has been very, very successful as well with many business ventures. Just a couple of quotes very quickly. Warren Buffett, this is what he said. I insist on a lot of time being spent almost every day to just sit and think. That's very uncommon in American business, to read and think. So I do more reading and thinking and make less impulsive decisions than most business people do. I do it because I like this kind of life. And I think you know where he's going with that. Richard Branson, here's a quote that I have from him. For a successful entrepreneur, it can mean extreme wealth, but with extreme wealth comes extreme responsibility. And the responsibility for me is to invest in creating new businesses, jobs, employing people, and to put my money aside to tackle issues where we can make a difference. Now, again, people are motivated by different things. Entrepreneurs, here's one of those formal definitions, if you will. An entrepreneur is someone who exercises initiative by organizing a venture to take benefit of an opportunity, and as the decision maker decides how, I can't even read, decides what, how, and how much of a good or service will be produced. Now, for most of us, I think, again, as I said earlier, we may not be the owner of a business ourselves, but for us, I think an entrepreneurship approach may be very, very beneficial. And just to move forward with that, here's a definition for those who love those. An entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, again, just to maybe talk about it, involves using processes that are very much similar to that which an entrepreneur would use. However, it's done within an organization. Now, sometimes the outcome of that is the spinning off of a venture that becomes an entity unto itself. And perhaps those who have spearheaded it, pioneered it, are actively involved in CEO types of roles or Chief Innovation Officer in this new venture, which can have very positive outcomes for them, benefits that apply, that are realized by them. The question that I have for you now on the screen is basically this, and I need you to think about this. How is it that businesses and organizations can perhaps derail or kill entrepreneurial thinking? And no names need to be mentioned here, that's quite all right, but you've probably come across situations where good ideas didn't make it further down the road. And maybe it was your good idea, or what you felt was a legitimate thing that should be pursued. I've seen that in my career path too. And it's unfortunate. We feel bad when organizations don't perhaps see things the way we see. They have a different perspective. but hopefully we can find ways to share those perspectives in our organizations and find those win-win opportunities that do lead to successful outcomes. So maybe you can think about some of those things, and maybe you can put those into the chat feature too, if there are some things that can kill or derail ideas. We're not going to go to those right at this point, but I came across an interesting perspective I want to share with you. I was doing a presentation for APEGA, the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists here in the province of Alberta. And one of the other presenters, I sat in his session, Dr. Sami Fahmy, and he raised an interesting concept. And I want to just give this to you because I think it has some merit. He did an interesting exercise with a group, and he said, if we wanted to sabotage this project, what would we do? You know, it's kind of the reverse situation. If we wanted to blow this thing up and just cause it to go down in flames, what are the things that we would do to achieve that unfortunate demise of a project or an idea? And the purpose for that was then to say, if this is something that could go wrong, what could we do to mitigate the potential downside risk? How could we preemptively resolve that potential issue if it were to arise? So that was an interesting thing. Now, Sean, I will come to you now and maybe just ask, were there any comments about things that can derail or kill entrepreneurial thinking?
We have process and structure, stifle imagination and innovation. And then we had a couple questions come through, Jim.
Okay. Sean, do the questions kind of tie into the area that we're at right now?
They do. I'll pose them, and they might be a precursor to something coming up in the presentation. But first question is, what does it take for an entrepreneurial type to convince a non-entrepreneurial type that a solution has strong potential? Second question is, lack of taking action repeatedly, excuses not to move forward on new ideas.
Yeah. So the second point that you raised there, Sean, from the participant, thank you for both of those, by the way. The second one, yeah, I think if people don't see the value in an idea, I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are just used to the status quo. There's no denying that. The percentage of the population that is comfortable looking at things through a new set of eyes, looking at options, most people, the reality is most people prefer to be a follower. No one likes change. Change becomes uncomfortable. So to be presented with a change, we've just gone through a bit of a change. We're still going through it. It makes us uncomfortable, and we long for the old days, the way we used to do things. On the first question that was raised, just to come back to that, I think the processes that we are going to touch on a little bit later in the presentation will help with some of those ways to come up with creative ideas and to engage with them. So maybe if we could just defer that, and hopefully we will cover it off. If not, perhaps it can be raised again, okay? All right. So other blocks to generating ideas, the fear of making a mistake. Within an organization, you're taking a risk when you put an idea forward. That was mentioned in the questions that were raised by our participants. Looking for more information, more knowledge, stalling, deferring. Sometimes expanding the circle that's involved can become too unwieldy and nothing really gets done. Sometimes it takes a small group that has intimate knowledge with the issues, that can focus on it to move something forward and then present it to the larger group. So those are some things that I've seen, and I know that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg type of stuff. But you know, the reality is we're all different. Some of us are more different than others. Now, I apologize, maybe I fall into that camp. You've probably seen this discussion here, left brain thinking versus right brain thinking. And on the left of the screen here, we have some of the characteristics that kind of fall into that area. Just to quickly summarize on those facts, I mean, we look for facts when we're using our left brain. We're looking for things that are concrete, that we can grab onto, hang on to, tangible. We are also often looking for, we tend to use math, logic, these types of things in the way that we approach from the left brain. On the other hand, and this is where the entrepreneur needs to maybe come up, not necessarily with a technical solution, but with a creative solution. And on the right brain side of things, we're looking for that creativity, the imagination, the arts, for example, music. These types of things are often associated with right brain thinking. And it's where your intuition comes into play as well. So I wonder if we could maybe just take a moment and have a little bit of fun with this. If you could make sure that your mics are on mute, they probably are. But what I'm going to suggest is that when we go to this next slide, what I'd like you to do is to quickly take a look at each color that is mentioned on the next slide, but then and words are associated with it. But what I'd like you to do is to verbally, where you are, all on your own, say the color, not the word. Okay, so give this a try. We'll just take a moment. Quickly go through that. Say the color, not the word. Do it quick. I'm glad you had your mics on mute. So I think you're probably getting the idea if you've done the exercise, and I hope you have. When I work in person with a group, we'll often pair up and do this as an exercise. But what you probably noticed, and if you've seen this before, great. What you probably noticed is that the right brain is trying to say the color while the left brain is fighting to say the word that it sees. So that's an interesting example of the conflict that we can sometimes come into. The challenge for us is to really provide opportunity for both sides of our brains to look at a problem or a challenge. Albert Einstein, I like this quote that's attributed to him, and you've probably seen it before. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So with that being said, let's walk down the innovator's path. And I came across this information by an American entrepreneurial expert and creative thinker, Roger von Ock. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I've never heard it actually said in person or on video. I just haven't come across it. But from his book called A Kick in the Seat of the Pants, and if you like that title, he has a sequel, another book called A Whack on the Side of the Head. So you can imagine he's kind of a very creative type of a guy. But in this particular book, Kick in the Seat of the Pants, one of the things that he presents in that is what I've referred to as a creative action model. And basically, he takes a look at 4 different phases or steps or stages in the entrepreneurial thinking process. What we're going to do is just take a couple minutes and go through these: the explorer, the artist, the judge, and the warrior. The 4 stages that you and your colleagues could use to help go through exploring the potential for an idea and then marching it forward if it has merit as a reasonable idea worthy of pursuing. So let's take a look at this. So with the explorer, think about it as being an adventurer. Okay, you've got some bullet points there, but just to add to that, be an adventurer, an experimenter, perhaps a pioneer that's following a new path, finding a new way through a forest, maybe looking for that golf ball. Maybe think of yourself as being in the show Star Trek, if you remember that, or Star Wars. But Star Trek, they had that phrase, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Maybe I'm dating myself on that, but that's really kind of the essence of what an explorer is trying to do. Picture yourself venturing off to a new planet or maybe some new and strange land, and you're like a pioneer who's coming into a new territory. Be inquisitive. See what's happening around you. Ask questions. Think about what might be helpful to you. Von Ock might say something like this. He might say, poke around into the unknown areas. Pay attention to unusual patterns. and seek out a variety of different kinds and sources of information. So it's really exploring. Now, for an entrepreneur, coming back to that aspect where we're working within an organization, we need to be aware, and I've been in this role too, you need to be aware of the constraints that are around us. We all have people that we answer to. So stretching may be all right, but going too far can have some negative consequences. We just need to be aware of what those could be and then decide, is it worth the risk to keep pushing the envelope? Do you or do you not have the support that's necessary for you to feel comfortable enough to move forward? Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which is the artist. And the artist, think in terms of, you know, what creative things could you perhaps come up with? And maybe creativity hasn't been a strong suit for you in the past. That's okay. We can work our way through that. Engage that right brain side of things and imagine things being different or bringing different things into being to make something new, just to see what happens. Experiment. So think about being a kid in the sandbox again. Okay, I've got grandkids, so I like to see them, you know, at the play park and on the apparatuses there. And you know, kids are fearless. They really are. My grandson, he'll climb up on the monkey bars and he'll jump off the top. And I'm just looking at him and I'm saying, boy, I hope your bones are made out of rubber, because boy, you're going to bounce on that one. If you don't, you're going to get hurt. So coming back to the sandbox, kids aren't afraid to experiment, to try things that are new. And that's maybe a little bit of what we need to do as we explore the creative process. With kids, it's all new. It's all a game. It's fun. They don't know what the boundaries are. They haven't experienced them before, so there are no limits for them. I wasn't around when this happened, but I understand Isaac Newton. When he came up with the theory of gravity, as I understand it, he was thinking about the creative forces of nature around him when he happened to see an apple fall from an apple tree. That's the way the story goes. And again, I wasn't there. Von Ock, coming back to the artist here, he would probably say, experiment with a variety of different approaches. Follow your intuition. Rearrange things. Look at them backwards, upside down. Ask what if questions. And look for maybe hidden analogies that may be in there. Be prepared to break the rules. Create your own rules. Moving to the next stage, we come to one that Von Ock calls the judge. And at this stage, you really need to kind of step back from the action and become a little more objective, maybe a lot more objective about what you're working with, what you're looking at, what feedback you're getting from the things that you've been working on. You might want to think of yourself as being somewhat like a referee at some sort of a sporting event, and you're the referee, or maybe you're an adjudicator or an arbitrator in a dispute between various parties, and you have to remain objective, looking at the evidence. Maybe you're an appraiser of something that has value and you're trying to come up with a realistic number as to what that piece of jewelry, for example, or a piece of land or a piece of equipment, what it's actually worth. So if you were a judge in a court of law, you'd be responsible for making some sort of a decision on the merits of a particular situation and then rendering your verdict. Von Ock would probably have you consider this. Is this idea that you're working with, is it worth pursuing? Critically weigh the evidence that you've come up with. Look for some potential drawbacks. What are the potential risks? And critically review, are you maybe working with some faulty assumptions? Some would say, listen to your gut. Others would say, seek input from others who could probably offer some sage advice from their experience. But ultimately, you have to come to a decision. Is it a go? Is it a no-go? Is it a deferral? Is there maybe another path or an option that you should be exploring? Maybe you park this idea for a while and pursue something else. The final step in the process is that of the warrior. And that's where you're really campaigning for the concept that you've come up with. You spent a lot of time and energy, presumably, in investigating this thing. It has merit. You've judged it to be so, and that it's worth pursuing. Now, this is when you have to commit yourself and, you know, set things in motion that you're going to pursue and go into action. So the warrior, think of the warrior as being the champion for the cause. They really believe in the concept, and they're committed to seeing it advance. And they will reasonably do all that is within their power to see it succeed. And that's a bit of the balancing act there too. How far is too far? Where is the line that you should not cross for whatever reasons that might be? Longevity with the career might be part of it, or commitment to the cause. If you really feel it's worth pursuing, you're probably going to pursue it. One of the things that I remember is that when I was in the financial institution, one of the things that came to me that I really did latch onto was this. If you don't believe in the value of what you're doing, of what you're selling or what you're promoting, why should anyone else? If you don't believe in the value that it has, why would anyone else? So again, like the warrior, are you fully committed to moving forward with whatever it is you feel has value and should be pursued? Von Ock would say something like this. He says, you become a warrior when you take your idea into battle. You're part general and part foot soldier. Develop your strategy and commit yourself to reaching your objective. Have the discipline to slog it out in the trenches. You need to overcome excuses, those idea killers, temporary setbacks, and other obstacles that you are going to encounter. And you have to be courageous. Have the courage to do what's necessary to make your idea a reality. Well, now that we've made a little bit of progress through this framework of 4 steps or 4 stages, what you really probably need to do now is to work with others. I mean, it's great to come up with an idea that's innovative, but more often than not, we're going to need to engage others. And I think this comes to some of the questions that Sean raised from our participants earlier. And I hope that this covers some of the things that you were thinking about. How about, if we had some skills that would be helpful to us in hearing, considering, and evaluating the ideas and concerns of others. And that's why I say this probably touches on what our participants were asking. If any of you are familiar with the 6 Thinking Hats by Dr. Edward de Bono, and if you've used this type of a process, either for yourself or as part of a group, and it can be used in both settings, and I've seen it used, it can be very helpful to use this as a means of engaging with those who come at things from a different perspectives than ourselves. So again, we don't all think alike. We have different backgrounds, educational experiences, preferences, biases, and things that color the glasses through which we look. And we are, in fact, in many respects, guardians of the resources that the organizations we work within, guardians of those resources to make sure, to a reasonable extent, that they are not wasted. Again, we have to exercise stewardship of those resources and make smart decisions with the assets, with the money, with the budgets that are afforded to us. So these different perspectives are, in fact, all valid, and they can play a role in helping us come up with a sounder, a better thought out strategy to take something forward. So let's take a moment and take a look at these 6 different thinking hats that de Bono has presented here, and just quickly go through them. You have them listed as bullet forms here, but let me just throw out a couple of things to each of these bullet points before moving the slide on. The blue hat, if you will, focuses on managing skill sets, that managing perspective. So the blue hat focuses on managing the thinking process and helps us to think about action plans, next steps, being focused on what needs to be done. So questions such as, what are we talking about here? What's the subject? And this is perhaps in a group meeting. This is where, you know, we can focus in on what is the topic that's being dealt with right now. What are we thinking about? You know, beyond just the topic that's on the agenda, where does this kind of direct that we should be headed? Like, is there a direction that's been determined here that we should be thinking about? And what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? Stephen Covey, I think it was, one of the 7 habits of highly effective people, talks about begin with the end in mind. So think about, where do you want to go? Once you know where you want to go, you can find a path to get yourself there. And as a group, hopefully you'll come up with a better path. The white hat focuses on things like data, facts, information. It's what's known and things the way we see it as they are right now. So consider only from a white hat perspective, we're only looking at the information that's available to us right now. What are the known facts? Moving to the red hat. Red hats, maybe this is a good color too, deals with emotions, with feelings, with hunches, with instinct, with intuition. So what is the intuition that an individual or a group maybe senses with respect to the subject that you're dealing with the idea? What's your gut reaction to it? So, you know, this is where you'd probably have statements coming up in conversation, discussion, statements that focus in on emotional feelings, and maybe without having any evidence to back it up. It's just, you know, I'm feeling uneasy about this. Well, why is that? What is it about the situation that has you concerned? Let's take a look at that. The black hat. Johnny Cash, I think, had the black hat, didn't he? And we're not talking about Men in Black, the movie with Will Smith, okay, although that was kind of fun too. The black hat focuses on potential problems, maybe seeing things black and white, looking at the potential negative side of things. Why something may not work the way that we would want it to work. What are some of the potential problems? So this is an opportunity to apply your thinking towards creatively coming up with a positive outcome. How could we, for example, we're using logic, we're using reason. We're trying to identify reasons why we should be exercising a measure of caution. It's perhaps taking a conservative approach and maybe deferring immediate action. This is kind of what Buffett was talking about, you know, doing reading and thinking before jumping to a potential action. So thinking things through. The second last hat that we're going to take a look at here is the yellow hat. And the yellow hat focuses on values, things that we feel are important, that would provide a benefit to us or to the organization. Again, if you're working with a group, hopefully we are focused on the benefits to the organization, not necessarily personal outcomes that you're aspiring to. Although I do like when these things work in concert and you can achieve your objectives as well as that of the organization. So with the yellow hat, your focus should be applied to potential positive outcomes. For example, wouldn't it be nice if we could operate our businesses with a cleaner environment internally, or with less potential pollutants in the environment around us, affecting the communities within which our businesses and organizations operate? That's been something that many businesses have been pursuing. They've been using yellow hat thinking about coming up with a green solution. Okay, just had to throw that in, sorry. So identify benefits, look for harmony, and how can we cooperate? How can we collaborate? Think about your customer. Who is the customer for the business or organization that you're working for? Keep them in mind as you think about the things that you're doing. How does it help them? Ultimately, if it helps your customer, I think it's going to be helping your business. They'll continue to work with you, and they'll probably be sending referrals your way. The last hat is the creative green hat. And the green hat focuses on finding ways to release that creativity. okay? This is kind of the essence of what we're dealing with here in this session. So think about some of the possibilities. What are the alternatives that we could be looking at? What are some of the things that might be potential solutions, new ideas? Introduce areas for consideration and exploration. So don't limit your options. Brainstorming is a great exercise that can be put into practice here. And one of the keys to a successful brainstorming exercise, as you know, is don't judge ideas too prematurely. Make sure you get the ideas out on the table, because often one idea will dovetail in nicely to another one, and you get the creative juices flowing, and out of that, you can often come up with a better solution than the original idea that was laid out in the discussion. So those are some of the things that I really do believe will be helpful for us when we work with others to help connect their ideas, their thinking, their energy into that four-stage process of marching an idea through to a successful conclusion. So without too much more, Sean, is there any further things? Maybe I can just ask you, was there anything further that came up in terms of feedback from our participants?
No, other than the majority of the people that were online here are left brain thinkers, which isn't a surprise to this industry, is my take.
I'm glad to hear that. I wish more organizations would, in fact, you said left brain?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're dealing with the logic side. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, that makes total sense. I find that with engineers, with accountants, with lawyers, with a lot of the professions, the disciplines that people have gone through, that is the practice, that's the normal routine. Okay, so the challenge, just to come back to it, is exactly what we're dealing with here today, is how do we go about spending a little bit of time, dare I say, an appropriate amount of time for our audience. It won't be the majority of the time, but let's give a little bit of time to some of the other perspectives. And this is maybe where the 6 thinking hats will come into play to help us with that exercise. Anything else, Sean?
Just those 2 questions that were raised earlier. I'll repeat them just to make sure we covered them off. I think we did. What does it take for an entrepreneurial type to convince a non-entrepreneurial type that a solution has strong potential? And I think that's the exercise of, like what you just said, Jim, is spending some time to take a step into some other colored hats to help understand their perspective and bring them over to your perspective, and really, use that platform or use that exercise to your day-to-day discussions with those folks.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second was lack of taking action repeatedly, excuses not to move forward on new ideas.
Yeah, that last one is definitely a barrier, and that's the challenge. So I empathize with the person who put that forward, because I'm assuming that you were an individual who has tried to move some new ideas forward and run up against those barriers. So that is difficult, but I guess all I can really encourage you to do at this point is to try to explore things with them about what some other potential solutions could be. What are some of the other options? I mean, one of the classics that people will come to is, we've never done it that way. Well, just because you've never done it that way before doesn't mean that there isn't a better way of doing it out there somewhere. That's what innovation, that's what progress is all about, coming up with a better solution. One of my former managers that I worked for many, many years ago, we had used this phrase, and you're familiar with it too, the concept of best practices. His phrase, and you've maybe come across it as well, is that best practices really are best known practices at the time. That is, until something better comes along. So if if we were not to explore innovative options and explore this in a little more detail, you know where we would be? That's a rhetorical question, but it leads me into the next story that I want to tell you. We would be back in the Stone Age. So that reminds me of a little bit of a story, and if I could share that with you. I understand that it's actually true. Maybe not. It is a story. But there were two cavemen that were standing and outside their cave, and they had just come back from a successful hunt. And now the task for them was to carve up this huge beast that they had captured on their hunt and put it into storage for food for themselves, their families, and for the village. So as they're working away at skinning this large animal, sorry for any of you vegetarians out there or vegans, but this is a long time ago, okay? Things have changed. So one caveman says to his buddy, have you ever thought about the future? Have you ever thought about everyday life and how things might be made a little bit easier? What if we didn't have to carry all of this hunting gear on our backs and then drag this animal back to the camp? What if we had something to pull these heavy loads back to the camp with us? And so the two of them, they're looking at each other, looking at what they've done and nodding in agreement. Yeah, it would sure be great if they had a solution to that. So this first guy, he says, now, hey, wait, take a look at this. And he runs over to some bushes that are nearby and he retrieves something and he brings it back for his buddy to take a look at. Now, standing up, he proudly presents it, his invention, and he says, what do you think of this? Now, don't you kind of hate that awkward silence? You know, when you present a new idea and you just kind of get a blank stare. This guy says to his buddy, I call this thing the wheel. What do you think? And so his buddy, who's still working on carving up the meat, takes a good close look at it. And after a period of time and considering, he says, well, you may not have noticed this, but your wheel is kind of flat on the bottom. And in addition, it's actually flat on all four sides. You may want to rethink this, he says. Maybe you want to come up with another iteration of this concept, or maybe you want to do a pivot. And so a little deflated, the first caveman who presented his idea to his buddy says, okay, thanks for the feedback. Let's get back to what we were doing here, and I'll get around to my wheel here a little bit later. Then he pauses for a moment and just to himself, he thinks, around wheel. Maybe that's what I should do. That might just work. Well, anyway, I was told it's a true story. I don't know if it is or not, but maybe we should just move on. What I'd like you to do now is to put your creative hat on, and I don't think this is one of the tools that our cave buddies were using, but nowadays we have many utensils which help make life a little bit easier in the kitchen, around the work site. This is, I believe, more of a common knife that you might find in a kitchen, in a chef's pantry, available for them to use with the food products that they have. Take a moment right now, and in the chat feature, why don't you think about, very briefly, one or two words, what are some alternate uses that could be applied to this particular device? It's a knife, obviously, but what are some other creative things that instrument might be used for? I'm going to give you just a moment to think about that and enter some of the things in. Sean, if you want to come in just as things are maybe coming forward, ideas, alternate uses, why don't you let us know some of the things that are being seen there?
We've got wedge, toothpick, movie prop, art, cutting aluminum.
Those are all good ideas. The fact of the
Open
matter
an
is,
envelope.
envelope opener?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. It could be used as a murder weapon, but I don't want to go down that road, okay? Back scratcher could be a little dangerous.
Stopping a bike wheel from turning.
Yes, that would probably do it. Okay.
It could help you with collecting your accounts receivable.
Yeah, the accounts receivable clerk's favorite weapon. Okay, well, I'm sure you'll come up with some additional thoughts, and by all means, feel free to add them as they come in there. But what I want to do is maybe just move forward a little bit and leave some time at the end of our presentation. One of the things that I wanted to do is to present you with some things, some characteristics, and this is a great study, a great resource that was done by Jeffrey Timmons. And I want to give you a little background if you've not had opportunity to be familiar with Jeffrey Timmons out of the US. He's one of the great entrepreneurial thinkers in the US. And this particular book dealing with the entrepreneurial mind, I thought was very fitting with the topic that we're dealing with here too. So over the past 70 years, researchers have been searching for various personality factors that can lead to potential success as an entrepreneur. And while a high need for achievement was quickly recognized, one of the surprising findings that came out of the research, and has come out of many different sources of research, is that most entrepreneurs were really only moderate risk takers. They weren't really the high stakes risk takers that we often think of, roll the dice and hope for the best. They actually were very methodical, left brain thinkers, thinking about the situation that they were facing, considering the options, right brain thinking, coming up with a creative solution, and then being that judge that we talked about earlier in evaluating the potential for the opportunity, and then the warrior championing it and moving it forward. So Jeffrey Timmons, in doing an analysis of more than 50 studies, found a consensus amongst this documentation around 6 major dominant themes, general characteristics, if you will, of entrepreneurs. And these are listed here, the 6. So what I'd like to do is maybe just give you a couple of supporting points to each of these that you can maybe tuck away and use to elaborate on these. And again, you may want to go back to the source, the book, The Entrepreneurial Mind, and give this a closer look. But with respect to point number 1, commitment and determination. With respect to that, what we're really dealing with is tenacity, persistence, being a problem solver, and very much being disciplined. I think Bennis would be a great example of a disciplined approach to examining a situation before he jumps into it. Step number 2 there, with respect to leadership. The individual who demonstrates entrepreneurial tendencies, or the entrepreneurial mind, is more of a self-starter. They will typically inspire other people with their objectives, the goals that they're pursuing. And they're also very much, more often than not, inclined to treat other people as they themselves would want to be treated, as part of building a team, a cohesive team that works together to move something forward. The third point there, opportunity obsessed. With respect to that, the individual who's entrepreneurially inclined is more inclined to be intimately familiar with the knowledge of their subject area. They're familiar with the needs of the customers, their wants, their desires, that type of thing. They're focused on the market and what the market is asking for. So it's kind of the pull rather than a push into the marketplace. your solution is being pulled into the market to meet a need versus trying to push your idea into the marketplace and trying to find a customer for your idea. Calculated risk taker, minimizing risk, non-conventional thinker, point number 5, open-minded, lateral thinker. Point number 6, goals and results oriented. Where do we find these people? That's the question. That's the challenge. That's the one that you and your team, your organizations need to come up with. And I really do believe that the onus is on each of us to try to tap into the strengths of those that are around us. So we've covered a lot of material here with our how to tap into your entrepreneurial, your inner entrepreneur. I've certainly enjoyed the opportunity. Sean, is there anything else that we have in the way of questions from our audience that maybe we still need to touch on?
We don't have any additional questions at this moment, so I welcome them to come in as we kind of wrap this up. So yeah. Jim has said he's open for questions and he's open for heckling as well, right, Jim?
Well, let's think about that just for a moment, okay? Let's explore that. You know, I know we're almost at the top of the hour here, so I'm just going to maybe throw this out. If there are questions that you have, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with you. I have enjoyed that. And you may have questions that will still come in, that's fine. After the webinar, you may be sending information into Sean or the other team members that you'd like to pursue. And I'd be more than happy to entertain those and follow up where necessary. This thing is going to be uploaded, I guess, and be available for those who weren't able to participate. But Sean, I'll leave that with you. Maybe what I can do is maybe just close by saying, I have loved this space that I've been so fortunate to have been able to work in over these many years. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this: the mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions. And I really do believe that if we can engage our creative thinking, our inner entrepreneur, we will be able to individually and collectively with our teams come up with much better solutions that provide solutions for a world that's in so desperate need of innovation and ways to connect and the positive things that I'm sure you and your organizations try to bring. So with that being said, we've covered a lot of ground. Look for those people, tap into them, and make the future what you desire it to be. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, we got a message in here saying thank you, great stuff, and that they enjoyed the presentation and the information shared. Thank you for the insight on entrepreneurship. It's one of the key attributes our company wants of their team members.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Sean, and to all of the members, I wish you all of the best of success as you go forward. If I can help you or point you to other materials, I'd be more than happy to do that. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Jim.